This is a story so powerful it'll make you question what justice really means. In the dust-stained corridors of Bitter Creek, truth was a dangerous thing, and those who spoke it often vanished. But one woman refused to stay silent, even when it cost her everything. It began with a single ledger entry and ended with a revolution. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The desert wind rolled in off the flats, heavy with sage and something darker, as Abigail Crow tightened her grip on a scuffed leather satchel and stepped down from the dusty stagecoach into Bitter Creek. The town crouched low against the Nevada expanse, stubborn and raw, its wooden fronts sun-bleached to the color of old bones, sand forever grinding into every crack. She hadn't come chasing fortune. She'd come running from ruin. Missouri left behind in ashes, a widow's stipend barely enough for dry beans, creditors sniffing at her heels, and memories sharp enough to draw blood. At the center of Bitter Creek stood the Silver Dollar Saloon, its peeling sign creaking in the autumn wind of 1887. Abigail straightened her plain black wool dress and crossed the street toward the place that had promised her honest work. Bookkeeping by day, sewing by night. Secured through letters with the owner, Patrick Doyle. The Irishman who welcomed her wore kindness in his eyes, but his hands betrayed him, trembling as they clasped hers. "Mrs. Crow, welcome to our humble house," he said, accent thick and slow. "I hope the road didn't treat you too harsh." "Nothing I couldn't survive, Mr. Doyle," Abigail replied. She noticed how his gaze flicked again and again toward the courthouse looming across the street. Within her first week, she understood why his hands shook. The Silver Dollar's ledgers told a quiet, brutal story. Money drained in steady veins, vast sums vanishing beneath harmless labels like territorial improvements and land acquisitions. The figures were obscene, enough to buy the territory over and still have change to spare. Bitter Creek answered to one man, Silas Blackthorne. Tall, skeletal, silver hair slicked back like a crow's wing, his black robe seemed to drink in the light. He ruled the courtroom with a monarch's certainty and a rattlesnake's conscience. The courthouse dominated the square, and his word, quite literally, was law. Abigail's realization came late one Thursday, lamplight flickering over columns of numbers. A pattern emerged. Land purchases made within months, worthless desert plots bought cheap. Yet when matched against her late husband, Henry Crow's railroad maps, the truth struck hard. Every parcel lined up with the proposed Central Pacific extension. Desert scrub today, gold tomorrow. At dawn, she carried her findings to the one man she still believed untouched by rot, Reverend Isaiah Hoskins. The pale minister listened in his narrow office behind the church, blue eyes widening as she spoke. "My dear Mrs. Crow," he said, twisting his hands, "these are grave accusations. Are you certain?" "The numbers are certain," Abigail answered. "Silver Dollar money is buying the future railroad route. It's fraud, plain and deliberate." Hoskins nodded slowly. "Perhaps you should speak directly with Judge Blackthorne. Surely this is some misunderstanding." "There's no mistake," she said. "It's too precise." "Then we must pray for guidance," he murmured, voice trembling. "May I keep the ledgers overnight? I'll review them." Carefully, after a moment's hesitation, Abigail agreed. She returned to her boarding room above the Mercantile, unaware the Reverend was already writing a different message entirely. By sunrise, half of Bitter Creek knew Abigail Crow was dangerous. The trial, if it deserved the name, began at 10 sharp. Blackthorn's gavel cracked like a rifle shot as Wade Hollister, thick-necked and dull-eyed, hauled Abigail before the bench. "Abigail Crow," Blackthorn intoned, "you stand accused of theft, fraud, and seditious libel." "What theft? What citizens?" she demanded, fear clawing at her ribs. "Reverend Hoskins has provided evidence of falsified accounts," Blackthorn continued, producing the very ledgers she'd surrendered. "And witnesses claim you spread malicious rumors to undermine territorial authority." Ice flooded her veins. Hoskins sat in the front row, eyes fixed on the floor. Patrick Doyle was nowhere to be seen. "I demand an honest review of this evidence," Abigail said. "Enough!" Blackthorn snapped, gavel slamming down. "The proof is clear. Sheriff Hollister found additional forged documents in your room this morning." Pages appeared as if summoned by the devil himself. Her signature, expertly faked. The proceedings moved with butcher's speed. No defense, no witnesses. 37 minutes later, Abigail Crow was pronounced guilty. "The sentence," Blackthorn said, savoring the words, "shall fit both crime and character. You will be escorted to the eastern edge of Cactus Flats and released." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. 50 miles of desert lie between you and salvation," he went on. "No water, no provisions. And to ensure humility, you will walk barefoot." Even frontiermen shifted uneasily. Hollister's hand closed around her arm. Outside, the desert waited, silent, patient, and merciless. "Furthermore," Silas Blackthorn went on, his voice smooth and merciless, "to ensure you do not tear your clothing to shield your feet, you will walk out there barefoot." He leaned back slightly. "The desert has a way of teaching humility to those who forget their place." The room swayed beneath Abigail Crow. Cactus Flats was infamous. Jumping cholla, prickly pear, barrel cactus packed tight beneath an unforgiving Nevada sun. 50 miles of spine-studded ground. A slow, deliberate death. Everyone in that courtroom understood it. Wade Hollister's thick hands closed around her arms. "Time to settle your debt," he muttered. The town poured out behind them, a grim procession moving toward Bitter Creek's eastern edge, where the land opened into endless heat and distant violet mountains. Abigail's fingers trembled as she unlaced her worn boots and peeled off her stockings. Pebbles bit instantly into her bare soles. The crowd watched with uneasy fascination, guilt flickering in a few eyes. Blackthorn rode up to witness the moment himself. "Any last words, Mrs. Crow?" Abigail turned, studying the faces, some uneasy, some satisfied. "Truth has a way of rising," she said. "Even out there." "The desert answers to no one," Blackthorn replied coolly. "Move her along." Hollister shoved her forward. Abigail stumbled onto the hardpan marking the start of Cactus Flats. Behind her, the people scattered like tumbleweeds, eager to forget the woman who had dared to look too closely. Ahead waited a sea of green and silver death, shimmering beneath the climbing sun. Her first step burned. With it, civilization slipped away. The desert stretched endless and hostile, dotted with silent cacti standing like sentries. Their spines flashed like tiny knives in the light. By noon, Bitter Creek had shrunk to a brown blur. Abigail began to understand the true meaning of Blackthorn's justice. The first hour nearly shattered her. Feet once protected by leather screamed against sun-baked stone. Each step sent fire racing up her legs as thorns and sharp rock drove into tender flesh. The October sun, mild back in town, turned brutal overhead. By the second hour, blood marked her trail. Small red drops swallowed instantly by thirsty ground. Her black wool dress trapped heat, turning into a suffocating furnace. Sweat poured from her, moisture vanishing with every ragged breath. The land offered no mercy. Barrel cacti stood in tight clusters, their curved spines flaring with reflected light. Prickly pears sprawled across her path, forcing detours that stole precious strength. And everywhere lurked jumping cholla, deceptively soft in appearance. She learned the truth when her skirt brushed a pale cluster. Barbed joints leapt, clinging to fabric and flesh. She cried out as spines pierced through cloth into her leg. 20 agonizing minutes passed as she tore them free, each pull leaving bleeding holes and broken tips buried beneath her skin. Pain became constant, sharp, dull, relentless. Her lips split within hours. Her tongue swelled as thirst thickened her saliva until swallowing felt impossible. Yet the worst torment wasn't physical. By the fourth hour, mirages rose. Pools of shining water shimmered ahead, wavering just beyond reach. She staggered toward them, thirst overpowering reason. Each dissolved into heat and stone. Near midday, she saw a perfect lake, cottonwoods lining its banks, leaves whispering in a breeze she couldn't feel. She ran, sobbing, ignoring fresh wounds. The vision held, then shattered. Salt, flat, and glare. She collapsed onto ground hot enough to sear skin. The sun crested and drifted west, but the heat deepened. Rocks and sand radiated stored fire. Her dress clung uselessly as the air itself turned suffocating. Hallucinations replaced mirages as her body faltered. She saw Henry Crow beside her, walking easily. "Just a little farther, Abigail," he said softly. "You're stronger than they know." She turned to answer. Only empty desert stared back. Then her mother appeared, holding an image of cool well water, dressed in the blue gingham she'd been buried in years before. And Abigail staggered onward, caught between memory, pain, and the slow unraveling of her mind. The whisper came again, like a ghost on the wind. "Drink, child." But the vision never solidified, always just out of reach, no matter how desperately Abigail clawed for it. And the dead weren't the only ones haunting her mind. Judge Silas Blackthorne appeared often, his black robe swirling in air that didn't move, laughter echoing as she stumbled. Sheriff Wade Hollister rode by on a horse made of shadows, tipping his hat with cruel amusement every time she collapsed. By the time the sun sank past its peak, Abigail had no idea which way was forward. The mountain she'd used to guide her had vanished behind waves of heat and her own dimming sight. She wandered in uneven loops, retracing her own bloodied footprints without knowing it. 50 miles to safety may as well have been 500. Her feet were no longer feet. They were mangled clumps of flesh, cactus needles jutting out like a porcupine's back. Each step left a trail. Skin, blood, torn pieces of herself. She no longer registered individual pain, but it was all one giant flame rising from her calves downward. The wool dress she once wore with pride now hung in rags. Thorn bushes had sliced it apart. And when she tried pulling away Shola's spines, she ripped entire sections clean off. The scraps that remained were useless against the sun, which had scorched her exposed skin a furious red, soon to blister. As the sky turned to molten gold, Abigail's body started giving up. Her world narrowed to a dark tunnel. She couldn't remember why she walked or where she aimed to go. The agony had numbed her nerves, leaving only a strange, weightless fog. She collapsed one final time, and this time she didn't rise. Her cheek lay against burning earth as she watched the sunset bleed across the sky, fiery orange and bruised purple. It would have been beautiful had it not been a deathbed. The desert, timeless and indifferent, made quiet preparations for her passing. Vultures circled, their cries distant but growing clearer. Coyotes would be next. By sunrise, only bones would remain to mark where Abigail Crow made her stand against corrupt justice. But then, just as her senses faded, a sound cut through the silence. Something real, not a hallucination, not a voice from the grave. Hoofbeats, steady, rhythmic, deliberate. Not the chaotic thunder of a posse. A single rider. Abigail tried to lift her head to call out, but only a rasp escaped her parched throat. The hoofbeats drew nearer. A bridle jangled. Leather creaked. Through the shimmering haze, she saw him. A rider coming from the north, where no civilized man should have been. Her last thought before surrendering to the dark was simple wonder. Was this another mirage? Or had someone truly found her? The hoofbeats didn't vanish. Strong arms lifted her from the sun-baked ground. Through swollen lids, she glimpsed a face, not from any dream, nor any courtroom. Bronze skin kissed by sun and dust. Long black hair brushing his shoulders. Eyes like deep wells, quiet, knowing. Eyes of a man who'd endured and survived. "Easy," he murmured, voice low and calming, touched with something older than English. "You're safe now." Cool water met her cracked lips. Her body responded like it had found salvation. She drank too quickly. He gently pulled the water skin away. Slow. Let your body remember how. The man was nothing like the folks of Bitter Creek. He moved with the quiet ease of a predator or protector. Someone born to wilderness. Buckskin pants, worn cotton shirt, dust-covered boots. His horse stood nearby, regal and calm, a chestnut and white stallion with eyes full of loyalty. "My name's Nate," he said, using the name easier for white tongues. But his true name, Red Hawk, carried a different weight, one tied to wind and land and something far older. "Can you tell me yours?" "Abigail," she croaked, voice shredded. "Abigail Crow." "Well, Abigail Crow," he said, beginning to rinse her wounds with precious water, "you've wandered deeper into these flats than most would dare ride." As Nate cleaned the blood from her torn feet, she found herself talking about Silas Blackthorne, the false trial, the sentence disguised as justice. His hands never faltered, but when she said the judge's name, she saw it, the sharp tension in his jaw. A quiet fury held in check. "Blackthorne," Nate repeated, the name landing heavy like a stone dropped into still water. "That man's shadow stretches far beyond your town." From a small leather pouch, he pulled out a dark salve, pungent with sage, and something else Abigail couldn't name. The moment he applied it to her broken feet, a blessed cooling began to chase away the fire she'd been walking on for hours. "You know him?" she asked. "Our paths have crossed," Nate replied, his voice calm but sharpened with a quiet fury. "The judge's version of justice has hurt more than just the people who stand before him." He didn't speak again for a long time, focused on wrapping her feet in soft doeskin strips. They were clean, soothing, felt like clouds compared to the raw meat her soles had become. His stallion, Dust Fire as he called him, moved instinctively to cast shade across them as the sun dipped low. "I've had eyes on Bitter Creek for a while now," Nate finally said, waiting for the rot to rise to the surface. "You were watching the town?" she asked, blinking through the exhaustion. He paused. His hands went still over the bandages. 18 months ago, my sister Ayla was found dead in an arroyo 5 miles north of Bitter Creek. A strange stillness fell between them. They said she fell, Nate continued. An accident while riding alone. But Ayla was the best horsewoman in our tribe. She could ride bareback through a lightning storm, never once lose her seat. Abigail felt the shift in his voice. A tremor of grief tightly reined in. What happened? She worked as a translator for a land surveyor. Same project you uncovered in those ledgers. She started to understand what was really going on. Who was buying up what land, and why it would matter when the railroad came. She spoke up. She became inconvenient. The words hit Abigail like a blow to the chest. You're saying Blackthorne had her killed. Judge Blackthorne was conveniently in Sacramento that week. A solid alibi. But Sheriff Hollister wasn't. Neither were his deputies. They found Ayla's horse 2 days later, calm and uninjured. Ayla herself had been struck in the back of the head, thrown into the arroyo to make it look like an accident. Nate finished tying off the last bandage, then helped her sit up against a large boulder. The cool shade was a balm in itself. The heat, for the first time all day, was manageable. Why didn't you go to the authorities? She asked. He handed her the water skin again. Blackthorne owns the courts. Hollister runs the law. And federal oversight? That's just ink on paper. The men who killed my sister were the same ones who investigated her death. Abigail took a slow sip, conscious of his watchful eye. His every movement was measured. Part soldier, part healer. I've spent every one of these past months gathering proof, finding out how wide this thing stretches. And now you think I'm the one who can bring it forward? She asked. You've already stood up to Blackthorne, he said. Most folks in Bitter Creek know what's going on. But knowing and doing something about it are two very different things. She studied him, the firelight beginning to etch his profile in amber and shadow. There's more, isn't there? This isn't just about Ayla. Nate looked out toward the desert, where long fingers of dusk crept between the cactus arms. The route they're clearing runs through 3 tribal territories. Our treaties promise us compensation, relocation help, some kind of dignity. But if the land's privately owned by the time the railroad shows up, those promises mean nothing. They get to pretend the treaties never existed, Abigail whispered. Exactly. And we become squatters on land our ancestors are buried in. She drew a slow breath as realization bloomed. This isn't about money. This is about erasure. As full night settled, Nate built a small fire using dried cholera wood and tucked it into a natural dip in the rocks, hidden from any distant eyes. The desert cooled rapidly, the warmth of the flames wrapping around her like a worn blanket. She watched him share strips of jerky and hardtack from his pack, calm as if none of what he said had cost him anything to reveal. Why'd you save me? She finally asked. You could have walked away, left me to die and kept moving. He tossed some grain to dust fire, his movements slow and thoughtful. Because if I had, I'd be no better than the men we're fighting. He paused, gaze steady. And because sometimes the spirits send help when you least expect it, even if it comes in the form of a dying woman in the dirt. Heat flared across her cheeks. She tried to laugh, but it caught in her throat. I'm not exactly in shape to save anyone. I can't walk, I've got no money, no name anymore. I'm probably wanted as an escaped criminal. You've got something more valuable, Nate said. You know Blackthorn's numbers. You know where his money goes and how it moves. And most important, you're supposed to be dead. That's an advantage? He nodded. Dead women don't draw attention. They move in silence, gather allies, and strike when no one expects it. Blackthorn thinks his problem is gone. His arrogance will be his downfall. The fire snapped softly between them. Abigail sat in silence, weighing the road ahead. The smart move would be to ask Nate to ride her to the nearest settlement. Disappear. Start over. California, maybe. A new name, a clean break. But something in her gut said she wasn't done yet. Choosing the smart way meant walking away. It meant letting Silas Blackthorn go on bleeding the land dry, destroying lives while she disappeared and saved her own skin. But could she live with that? So what exactly are you proposing? Abigail asked. Nate's smile was the first real warmth she'd seen since stepping off that doomed stagecoach into Bitter Creek. A partnership, he said. You bring knowledge, Blackthorn's operations, financials, motives. And you're a witness they can't just silence again. I bring protection, resources, and people who've been waiting for a reason to act. People, she echoed. If you're strong enough to ride tomorrow, I'll take you to them, he said. You're not the only one burned by his brand of justice. Some of us have waited a long time for someone to light the spark. You surviving? That was the spark. Abigail tilted her head to the stars, clearer, purer than any sky she'd known in civilized places. Somewhere out there, Blackthorn was likely sipping fine whiskey, convinced she was dead, his secrets buried with her in the sand. That thought lit a fire inside her, hotter than the campfire before her. All right, she said. Partners. But I want to know the whole plan before we make any moves that put innocent people at risk. Nate nodded, approving. Spoken like someone who knows consequences. He gestured toward the blankets. Rest. Tomorrow, we begin the real work. Justice. Not the kind Bitter Creek peddles. The kind that actually makes the scales balance. As she settled back against her makeshift pillow, blanket tucked around her by Nate's steady hands, Abigail felt something shift in her chest. For the first time since uncovering those cursed ledgers, she felt something other than fear. She felt purpose, and something harder to admit. Trust. For the quiet man who had every reason to leave her in the dust, and didn't. Night settled over the canyon in its hush of wind and starlight. Coyotes called from the distance. Small creatures rustled in dry brush. The rocks whispered with ancient breath. And Abigail Crow, wanted, wounded, presumed dead, felt safer here than she had in any proper town. Tomorrow would bring new threats, tough choices. But tonight, she was alive. She had an ally, and that, she thought, was a hell of a beginning. Dawn arrived, soft and reverent in the canyon, slanting through the layers of red sandstone until the light looked like something you might find in a cathedral. Abigail blinked awake, startled by the sound of trickling water. Real water. For a moment, she thought it was a dream. But the damp air and the coolness brushing her cracked lips told her otherwise. Nate was already up, brushing dust fire near a natural spring spilling from the canyon wall. The stream pooled into a small, crystal basin before vanishing into the thirsty sand. It looked like a miracle. How do you feel? He asked as she tested her bandaged feet. Like a buffalo stomped me, she grunted. But I'm still breathing. She leaned on the rock wall and managed to stand. The canyon shimmered golden around her. This place, it's incredible. she whispered. My grandfather brought me here when I was 12, Nate said. He called it the place where earth bleeds water, sacred, hidden, known only to my bloodline. He helped her to the spring's edge. The railroad surveyors haven't found it yet, but they've come close. When they do, they'll claim it, just like everything else. Water like this? It'll get bought, fenced off, turned into another tool for control. Abigail knelt and splashed the cold water on her face. It sent jolts of life into her sunburned skin. You're taking a risk, she said quietly, bringing me here. Trust takes risk, he replied. And trust is the only weapon we have left. They've got gold, guns, and judges. We've got this. Nate handed her a tin cup of strong coffee and a bowl of cornmeal mush. Then, using a stick, he began drawing in the sandy ground. This is Bitter Creek, he said, carving rough lines. And this is what they're doing. He marked X's across the terrain. These land purchases, they form a corridor, 60, maybe 100 miles long. Anyone who wants water, minerals, or to move goods, they'll have to pay Blackthorn's price. Abigail squinted, her sharp mind clicking into motion. They're not just stealing land, she murmured. They're building a monopoly, a regional empire. Exactly, Nate said. And the worst part? It's all perfectly legal. They're using territorial laws, loopholes, shell buyers, fake surveys. It's the biggest land grab in Nevada history, and every bit of it stamped with a judge's seal. There must be some kind of federal oversight, Abigail argued. Nate gave a bitter laugh. Oversight doesn't mean much unless Washington wants to look, and they won't, not unless we give them undeniable proof. Something even Blackthorn's allies can't cover up. Blackthorn's played his cards carefully, Nate said, gesturing to the rough map scratched into sand. He tapped markings that represented the boundaries of 3 tribal nations. To outsiders, our protests are dismissed as the ramblings of so-called savages. And the white settlers? They're either scared into silence, or they vanish altogether. The rare, honest officials who try to help. Blackthorn buys them off or gets them reassigned halfway across the country. Abigail felt the size of the monster they were up against settling into her bones. Then how do we even begin to fight something this deeply rooted? He's got the law, the courts, and local lawmen in his pocket. By doing the one thing he never expects, Nate said. We use his own tools against him. His power thrives in shadows, whispers, fear, isolation. But you're something he didn't account for. A ghost with knowledge. A woman declared dead who still walks and carries the truth. He knelt near his saddlebags, retrieving a leather-bound portfolio that looked too polished for this rugged canyon. You're not just a victim. You're a witness. Your ledgers hold hard numbers. Your story holds weight. With the right push, we can bring federal eyes here. I haven't exactly been idle these last 18 months, he added, flipping open the bundle. Abigail's breath caught. Pages upon pages of evidence. Maps, sworn accounts, scribbled timelines, and copies of land deeds. This is exhaustive. I've kept records on every suspicious death, every coerced land sale, every crooked ruling. No one notices the Indian in the corner, especially if he looks like a translator or a laborer. You mentioned someone. Patrick Doyle, the saloon owner? Nate's face tightened. He's caught in it deep. Blackthorn's got something on him, probably family back in Ireland. But I don't believe Doyle is evil, just trapped. If we can protect him and his people, then maybe he'll flip. And he'd be useful. Very The silver dollar keeps the books. If we get him to talk, it's the biggest crack in Blackthorn's whole operation. Abigail rose and wandered to the canyon wall, brushing her fingers across ancient pictographs. Her modern eyes couldn't make sense of the symbols, but her heart felt the weight of them. Is there anything that directly ties Blackthorn to all this? Papers? Letters? That's the problem, Nate said. He's careful. Doesn't write a damn thing. Only verbal orders, intermediaries, plausible deniability. What you found is the closest we've ever gotten. So we're left with witness statements and circumstantial evidence, Abigail said, turning to him. Not enough to move the feds, not yet. Not unless we catch him slipping, force his hand, make him act so boldly, so blatantly. Even his friends can't cover it up. Sunlight crept higher, casting cathedral-like rays through the canyon walls. Abigail blinked at the surreal beauty of it. How this sacred, hidden place could exist in the same territory as such evil. There's something else I haven't told you, Nate said, voice low. She turned back, sensing it mattered. My sister Ayla, she wasn't just translating maps. She was in love with one of the surveyors. His name was Evan Cole. Young, idealistic. He didn't know what the survey was really for until it was too late. He tried to fight it. What happened to him? Gone. Disappeared 3 days before Ayla was killed. Officially? He walked off. But he left everything behind. Clothes, money, even a letter for his mother, and a pocket watch that had belonged to his father. Abigail felt a sick twist in her stomach. They killed him too. Most likely. But his death was too clean. No body, no investigation. If we could prove what really happened to Evan Cole, his body, a witness, anything, it might be the break we need. Do you know where to start looking? There are places out there, Nate murmured, eyes on the spring. Places my grandfather spoke of, where the land hides the bones people want forgotten. Stories? They're more than that. And we have one thing Ayla and Evan never had. What's that? We're not alone. For a long beat, Abigail stood silent. A warmth flickered in her chest, a feeling she hadn't known since Henry's death. Belonging. Purpose. Who else is in this with us? If you're strong enough for a longer ride tomorrow, Nate said, I'll show you. There's a meeting. Folks who've been burned by Blackthorn's justice, and they're ready to stop being quiet about it. The rest of the day passed in a calm hush. Her body slowly healed. Her mind burned with possibility. They spoke of allies, plans, the cost of rebellion. And for the first time in a long while, Abigail Crow didn't feel like a woman running from death. She felt like a woman riding toward justice. Though their talks had revolved around strategy and survival, Abigail Crow found her focus slipping more and more to the man beside her. The way Nate Redhawk moved through the world, quiet but sure, with a steadiness that made her feel, for the first time in weeks, like the ground beneath her feet might hold. As twilight stretched across the canyon, and Nate stirred a modest stew over the fire, Abigail faced a question deeper than tactics or vengeance. She could ask him to help her vanish, ride far beyond Nevada, start again, forget it all. It would have been the reasonable path, the safer one. But Abigail Crow had never been a woman moved by safety. Not when she cracked open the ledgers. Not now. Nate, she said, voice low, their fire crackling soft, while the first stars blinked through the narrow cut of sky above the canyon. Before we meet whoever's out there, I need to ask something. He looked at her, patient. Go on. When we talk about justice, are we talking about going through courts and judges, about trials and evidence, or something else? Nate leaned back slightly, considering. I hope we're talking about legal justice. That's the kind that lasts, if you can get it. His sentence trailed off, unfinished. But she understood. In this land, where the law bowed to wealth and fear, justice didn't always wear a robe. I need time to think on it, she said. Of course, he replied. It's not a light choice. He stood, stirred the embers down, and checked on Dustfire one last time. But while we're thinking, he said over his shoulder, Blackthorn's still moving pieces. Folks keep losing land, livelihoods, loved ones, and thinking too long. Well, sometimes that's just another way of doing nothing. As Abigail lay under the starlit sky, her blankets pulled tight, the truth sat heavy on her chest. The moment she opened those ledgers, the middle ground had vanished. There was no hiding anymore, no pretending, justice or running, fight or disappear. And deep in her bones, she already knew which road she'd take. The trail to the sacred valley was unlike any road she'd known, if you could call it a road at all. Nate led Dustfire along half-forgotten paths, guided by rock stacks, shadow marks, and signs only a Modoc scout would know. It was a language written in earth and sky. Abigail rode behind him, arms around his waist, her injuries still tender but her grip steady. She could feel his breath rise and fall, calm and sure, every step of the horse echoing his quiet command. Somehow, despite everything, she felt safe here. Because of him. They climbed through hills like giant sleeping spirits, rising from the desert. The canyon narrowed until they rode in dusk, even at midday, the sky a mere ribbon above. How much farther? Abigail asked as they paused to let Dustfire drink. Not far, Nate said, then turned serious. But before we get there, you need to understand, these people don't trust easy, especially not white folks. Because I'm white? She asked. Or because I'm a woman? Both, he answered. But mostly because trust has cost them dearly. Too many promises broken. Too many friends who disappeared when the bullets came. They rode on, and just as the sun tilted westward, the canyon gave way to a hidden valley walled in red cliffs. A stream trickled through cottonwoods and willows, and ancient cliff dwellings stared down at them like the eyes of the past. But it was the gathering in the valley center that drew Abigail's attention. Nearly 30 people sat in a circle around a fire, men and women of mixed tribes. Their clothes ranged from buckskin to calico, practical, worn, blended. At the head of the circle sat an older woman, straight-backed and regal, her silver hair braided with feathers and beads. Her face bore the marks of 100 storms survived. White Willow, Nate murmured as they dismounted. She speaks for the council. He stepped forward, speaking in Modoc. Abigail followed, feeling the weight of every eye. Some voices answered Nate, some curious, some cold. White Willow raised her hand, beckoning them closer. Her gaze locked on Abigail's like a blade. You are the one meant to die in the flats? She asked in English, her voice weathered but strong. Yes, grandmother. And yet you stand here. Why? Abigail drew a breath. Because I believe I survived to bring justice to those who've never had it. Justice, the elder echoed, as if tasting the word. The white man's justice has never served our people well. Why trust it now? Before Abigail could answer, a younger man stood sharply. Tall, wiry, his face marred by scars that looked earned in war. Anger burned in his eyes. He didn't need to speak for Abigail to feel the wall she'd have to climb. "Why are we still talking about justice?" The scarred man snapped. "They stole our lands, slaughtered our kin, broke every treaty they ever wrote. The time for justice has passed. It's time for war." Murmurs of agreement rumbled through the circle until White Willow raised a single hand. The murmurs died instantly. "Sit, Iron Fox," she said sharply. "Anger won't serve us if it clouds your judgment." Iron Fox stood his ground, his jaw clenched, his voice bitter. "My judgment says trusting any white woman is a fool's game. What if she's a spy, sent here to learn our plans?" Nate Redhawk's voice cut through the tension, calm and low. If she were working for Blackthorn, he wouldn't have tried to kill her. Maybe her death was just a show. Maybe it was staged so she could slip in unnoticed. Abigail Crow felt the air shift, the circle leaning toward suspicion. She had seconds to turn the tide. "Mr. Iron Fox," she said, stepping forward. "If I were a spy, would Judge Blackthorn really send me to die? Barefoot, 50 miles across the desert? Would he risk me dying for real, just to sell a lie?" She pulled up her skirt just enough to reveal the bandaged soles of her feet, blood still seeping through the wrappings. "These wounds are real. My near death was real. And my commitment to seeing Blackthorn held accountable, that's real too." Iron Fox stared at her feet. His scowl faltered. Pain can be faked. A wound can be self-inflicted. White Willow's tone turned ice cold. "Joseph, your son's captivity has twisted your heart. That woman bears the mark of the desert. No one chooses that kind of suffering unless it's forced upon them." Silence fell like a hammer. Abigail's eyes swept the faces around the fire. So much pain, distrust, and buried hope. She turned back to Iron Fox. "Your son, he's being held, isn't he?" His features broke, just for a breath. Then he nodded. "Blackthorn's got him locked up on trumped-up charges. Says the boy'll hang for cattle theft unless I—" He stopped. Couldn't finish. "Unless you what?" Abigail asked gently. "Unless I report on anyone who might threaten his operations." He dropped his gaze. "I've been spying for 6 months, feeding Blackthorn information, betraying my own people, just to keep my son alive." The confession landed like thunder. The warriors nearest him edged away, their expressions a mix of shock, anger, and betrayal. But Abigail didn't flinch. She saw not a traitor, but a father. "What if we could get your boy out?" she asked. Iron Fox's head snapped up. "You can't. He's in Blackthorn's private jail, guarded round the clock." "Maybe not impossible," Nate said, rubbing his jaw. "If we stir up enough chaos in Bitter Creek, pull the guards off." "No," White Willow cut in. "We won't risk a dozen lives for a rescue mission that could fail." She turned to Iron Fox, voice soft, but her gaze steel. "You'll go to Blackthorn, one last time. Tell him you found where Nate and the white woman are hiding. Lead him into a trap. And if he kills my son in revenge," Iron Fox whispered. White Willow's answer was calm and cruel in its truth. "Then your son is already dead. Blackthorn won't let him go. He's a witness. But if we capture Blackthorn and his men alive," she continued, "we may have leverage, enough to bargain." Abigail saw the logic, but she also saw the cost. If this fails, we'll be starting a war against the territorial government. They'll send federal troops. "They're coming anyway," another voice answered. An older man spoke from the far side of the circle. Weathered face, thick gray beard, the unmistakable weight of a war chief in his stance. The railroad brings soldiers to protect it. Our choice isn't war or peace. It's between fighting on our terms or waiting to be wiped out on theirs. The debate that followed sparked like dry kindling. English blended with tribal tongues, anger with desperation. Abigail sat in silence, listening, trying to read not just their words, but the hearts behind them. Then a young woman stood. Intelligent eyes, calloused hands. Her voice calm but resolute. I've heard every argument for war, and I understand them. But I've seen what happens when bullets fly. It's not just soldiers who bleed. It's children. She turned to Abigail. You speak of justice, Mrs. Crow. What does that mean to you? Abigail rose, steady despite the pressure. It means no man is above the law, not even the rich. It means truth matters more than power, and that if legal justice is possible, we fight for it, no matter how slow or hard that road is. And if it isn't? The young woman asked. Then we find another way. But we don't rush into bloodshed just because it's easier. White Willow nodded slowly. You speak wisely, but tell me, how do you plan to bring about this justice when the law itself has been bought? Abigail had been waiting for that question. By dragging it into the open? By forcing the rot into daylight, so bright and undeniable that even Washington has to act. And for the first time that night, no one argued. How? Abigail asked. By giving Blackthorn exactly what he thinks he wants. A chance to wipe us out in one stroke. Her eyes scanned the circle, but instead of dying quietly in the desert, we turn it into a reckoning. A public spectacle he can't bury. Nate Redhawk leaned forward, tension tight in his shoulders. What are you suggesting? She took a breath. What she was about to say could either lead to justice or be her death sentence. We let Iron Fox go back and report that he found us, that we're hiding out near Apache Springs. We let Blackthorn come. The air shifted, but when he rides in with every gunman he owns, we make sure the truth comes with him. Witnesses, federal ones, people he can't bribe or shoot. People who'll carry the truth all the way to Washington. Iron Fox looked at her like she'd gone mad. You'd use yourself as bait? Put your life on the line hoping someone shows up in time? If it means stopping him from ruining more lives, then yes. Silence fell. A heavy, fearful silence. Then White Willow's voice cut through it, like wind in the canyon. It's a trick worthy of Coyote. Clever, dangerous, full of teeth. But it demands perfect timing and trust. A trust we rarely give. Her eyes swept the circle. All in favor of trying the Crow Woman's plan before we turn to war. Hands began to rise, slow and uncertain. Not all, but enough. Iron Fox's was the last, his face torn by loyalty and guilt. Then it's done, White Willow declared. And may the spirits guide our hands. Because if we fail, this'll be the last decision this council ever makes. The meeting dissolved into quiet clusters of whispered strategy. Abigail stood still in the firelight, her chest tight with both fear and purpose. She'd just volunteered to be bait in a deadly trap. A trap that might save dozens, or add her name to the long list of Blackthorn's victims. But as she looked into the tired, wounded eyes of those who had chosen to believe her, she knew this was right. Now, they just had to make it work. 3 days later, The plan in motion. For 72 hours, they refined every step, every roll, until even the young and old could repeat their part by heart. Abigail found herself at the center of a complex web stretching far beyond the valley, connecting allies she'd never met, resources she didn't know they had. The key was timing. Iron Fox would return to Bitter Creek and tell Silas Blackthorne he'd spotted Nate and Abigail holed up in the old ruins near Apache Springs, 20 miles southeast. Remote enough to seem real, but close enough for a fast raid. While Blackthorne prepared his strike, other pieces were already moving. A rider was galloping north toward Carson City, bearing documents, copies of Nate's evidence and Abigail's account of the corruption poisoning Bitter Creek. Whether the federal authorities would act in time, that remained a gamble. That messenger, his name's Luke Carver, Nate explained as he oiled his rifle. Army scout, knows every trail from here to the State House. Abigail watched him work, precise, methodical, like a man who'd fought too many battles to rely on luck. You think help will come? She asked. Nate paused. Honestly, probably not. Government's slower than molasses. By the time they untangle red tape, we'll be long buried. They exchanged a quiet look, truth heavy between them. The tribal council had agreed to the plan, but with no illusions. Their warriors would position themselves around Apache Springs, ready to act. But they couldn't promise Abigail protection if it went south. As they packed to leave the valley, Nate touched her arm. There's still time to walk away. No one would blame you for choosing life over justice. She buckled the pistol belt he'd given her, adjusting to its weight. If you were me, would you walk away? Nate's jaw tensed. That's different. This is my land, my people. My sister. Abigail shook her head. No, it's not different. Blackthorne's evil has reached everyone who still believes in truth. I may not be Modoc, but I'm still human, and humans have to stand up to men like him. Nate smiled, a slow, deep smile laced with something unspoken. Ayla would have liked you. I wish I could have known her, Abigail whispered. They rode out at high noon, slipping through a narrow western pass that led to the ruins of Apache Springs. Built into a curve of red rock, the old Pueblo ruins sat like bones in a forgotten amphitheater. Springs still bubbled from deep underground, feeding a green oasis in the dust. It was perfect. Tight canyons gave cover for ambush. High ridges offered lines of sight. And the wide central clearing guaranteed that when Blackthorne arrived, there'd be no shadows left to hide in. Abigail's pulse beat faster as they neared. This was it. No turning back. In just a few hours, Abigail Crow would once again come face to face with the very men who condemned her to die. Silas Blackthorne and Sheriff Wade Hollister. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was walking straight into their hands again. Only this time, by her own choosing. As the last campfire crackled inside the broken courtyard walls of the ruins, Nate Redhawk crouched beside her. Your only job is to stay alive long enough for help to show up, he said. Don't play hero. That's what we're for. Abigail looked at him, sensing the storm building behind his calm. And if no one comes? She asked. Nate's voice hardened. Then we improvise. But listen, if it goes bad, I need your word. You run if I say run. Don't stand your ground for the sake of some noble cause. There's no point dying in a fight you can't win. She met his gaze, saw the fear beneath his firmness. I promise, she whispered, but only if you promise to watch your damn back. I didn't crawl out of that desert just to watch you get yourself killed playing the hero. Their hands brushed, a brief touch that said more than any goodbye could. Then Nate moved off, his footsteps soundless as he vanished into the high ruins above. He scanned sight lines, mapped exits, like a man who'd survived too many ambushes to leave anything to chance. Abigail made herself visible, deliberately. She lit a fire, moved around the clearing, made sure her figure could be spotted from the cliffs above. Anyone approaching would see what looked like an unguarded woman, and they'd come in fast. The worst part was the waiting. Her mind raced. What if Iron Fox had been caught? What if Blackthorn caught wind of the trap? What if the feds never came? Just as the last light slipped behind the western ridge, hoofbeats echoed off the canyon walls. 12 riders. Nate's voice drifted down from the shadows. Hollister's out front, Blackthorn beside him. They're riding in khaki, no scouts, no caution. Abigail gave a small nod to show she heard. She didn't have to fake the tension in her chest. Every instinct screamed at her to run. Then the riders entered the firelight. Well, Hollister's voice rang across the clearing, smug and cold. If it isn't our runaway prisoner. Abigail turned to face them, letting just enough fear show to sell the lie. One hand hovered near the pistol hidden at her hip. Sheriff Hollister, Judge Blackthorn, can't say I'm surprised. Blackthorn swung down from his horse, the tails of his long black coat catching the firelight like wings. His voice dripped honeyed contempt. Mrs. Crow, you've proven quite the elusive fox. I must admit, your survival is impressive. Don't flatter yourself, she said. I didn't survive because of you. I survived because someone still believes in justice, more than I ever saw in Bitter Creek. Blackthorn's smile tightened. Ah, yes, your noble companion. Mr. Redhawk, isn't it? His eyes lifted toward the rocks. No need to skulk, son. Come join us. Let's all be civilized. Abigail's blood went cold. He knew, but Nate's voice cut in from a different ridge than where she'd last seen him. I'm fine where I am, Judge. But thanks for the offer. Hollister pulled his pistol. His men followed suit. Come down now, or we smoke you out. I don't think so, Nate replied. His rifle appeared, aimed dead at Blackthorn's chest. Please, go on with your speech. I'm curious how you plan to justify murder tonight. Blackthorn gave a low chuckle. Murder? No, my friend. Mrs. Crow was legally sentenced by a court of law. That she survived her sentence doesn't erase its legitimacy. Abigail stepped forward. What about Evan Cole? What was his crime? That one hit the judge. A flicker of surprise danced across his face before he caught it. I'm afraid I don't know anyone by that name. The surveyor, Abigail pressed, eyes locked on him. The one working with your sister. The one who uncovered what the land grabs were really about. Blackthorn's expression cooled. You've been thorough. Yes, Mr. Cole became a liability, as did his lover. Regrettable, but sometimes business demands hard choices. The confession struck like a blow. Abigail clenched her fists. She had what she needed. Regrettable, Nate repeated, voice low as thunder. Her name was Ayla. She was my sister. She had more honor in her fingernail than you'll ever know. Blackthorn shrugged. I'm sure she was delightful, but sentiment has no place in enterprise, and this is enterprise. Sheriff Hollister nudged his horse forward, fed up. Enough talk. We're here to finish what we started. Oh, we most certainly did, Silas Blackthorn said, drawing a small pistol from his coat. Mrs. Crow, you've been quite the thorn in my side. but I'm willing to offer you an alternative." Abigail narrowed her eyes. "What kind of alternative?" "Join us," Blackthorn said smoothly. "Your bookkeeping talents are exceptional. I could use someone with your precision. You'd live well, comfortably." She stared at him, caught between disbelief and disgust. "You're offering me a job after trying to bury me in the desert?" "Business is business," he said with a dismissive wave. "Emotions have no place in it." "And if I say no?" His smile turned frigid. "Then you'll find out that the desert isn't the only place where inconvenient people vanish." Abigail's eyes swept the circle of armed men surrounding her, rifles raised and ready. Above them, Nate Redhawk stayed concealed in the ruins, but he was outnumbered, and the federal backup they'd hoped for was still nowhere in sight. "I need time," she said, stalling. "Time is a luxury we don't have." Blackthorn's voice dropped. "Choose. Work for me. Or lie beside that surveyor friend of yours, bones and all." Abigail's hand edged toward her hidden pistol. She knew it might be her only shot, literally. But before she could act, voices rang out from the canyon's mouth, firm, commanding voices backed by the telltale rattle of military gear. "This is Marshal Caleb Thornton, acting under federal authority," a booming voice declared. "All of you, drop your weapons. You're under arrest." Blackthorn's mask slipped in an instant. The arrogant showman turned to a caged animal, his gaze darting around, calculating options. But Abigail only felt one thing: relief. Against all odds, their desperate plan had worked. The canyon lit up with firelight flashing off rifles. Dozens of federal soldiers rose from behind rocks and ridges, training their sights on Blackthorn's men. But Silas Blackthorn didn't make his living on the frontier by folding at the first show of force. "You've got no jurisdiction here," he shouted. "This is territorial business. We acted under lawful authority." Marshal Thornton stepped forward into the light. Tall, stone-faced, and every bit the hardened lawman molded by years chasing outlaws across unforgiving terrain. And beside him, Abigail's breath caught. Dr. Eleanor Hayes, the territorial physician from Carson City, known throughout Nevada for her unwavering ethics and bulletproof reputation. "Dr. Hayes," Abigail called out, How did you get here?" "Your messenger found us just before dusk," the doctor answered, her sharp gaze sweeping the tense standoff. "Along with records detailing several suspicious deaths that demand federal scrutiny." Wade Hollister's pistol hand twitched. The look in his eyes said it all. They'd walked straight into a trap. "Judge," he began. "Hold your position," Blackthorn snapped. "It's just Washington meddling again." But Marshal Thornton had already unrolled the parchment. His voice echoed clear and final. "Judge Silas Blackthorn, by order of the United States Federal Court, you are under arrest for conspiracy to defraud the U.S., government, violation of territorial trust laws, and conspiracy to commit murder in furtherance of that fraud." "This is madness," Blackthorn hissed. "I demand to see your warrant." Thornton held the documents aloft. Signed by Judge Harrison Clark of Carson City, backed by evidence submitted by Luke Carver, and confirmed by Dr. Hayes' forensic review of unnatural deaths in your jurisdiction. Abigail felt a rush of vindication, but Blackthorn's expression turned to cold calculation, and she knew that look too well. "Sheriff Hollister," he said quietly, "don't forget, your wife and children live in Bitter Creek. So do your deputies' families. If this turns sour, accidents happen." It wasn't subtle. It didn't need to be. Abigail saw it ripple through the ranks. Some of the Bitter Creek lawmen shifted on their feet, realizing they were standing on a knife's edge between the weight of federal law and Blackthorn's shadow threats. Dr. Hayes stepped forward, medical bag in hand, voice unwavering. "Sheriff," she said, "I've personally examined 6 bodies. Each death suspicious, each overlooked under your watch. These weren't illness or misfortune. They were murders." "That's not possible," Hollister muttered. But his confidence had bled out. "I read your reports," she continued. "Negligent patterns, consistent signs of cover-up. Sheriff, you either turned a blind eye or you helped bury the truth." Then it happened. One of the younger deputies, Abigail recognized him from the Silver Dollar Saloon, let his rifle drop with a clatter. "I'm not dying for that bastard scheme," he said. "My pa didn't raise me to follow a snake." The sound echoed like thunder. 2 more deputies followed suit, tossing their guns to the dirt. But Hollister and the rest stood frozen, trapped between fear of federal judgment and fear of Blackthorn. From the shadows above, Nate Redhawk's voice rang out, steady as iron. "Sheriff, your boy Bobby's a good kid. Goes to school with ours. Shows respect always. Don't make him grow up thinking his father stood with murderers." Wade Hollister flinched, the weight of that truth buckling his expression. "Judge, you said no one would get hurt." He snapped, voice cracking. "You said it was just business." "Business always comes with hard choices," Silas Blackthorn replied, cold and measured. "And that's why men like me lead, because we do what others can't." A sound broke from Eli Cole, half sob, half snarl, as he raised his weapon and shifted its aim from Abigail to the judge himself. "Evan Cole was my brother," he growled, "and you killed him for your damn money." It struck like a thunderclap. Abigail saw Blackthorn's mask slip clean off, revealing the serpent underneath. "Your brother was weak," he hissed. "He couldn't see the greater vision." "You mean stealing land and burying those who got in the way?" Eli's voice shook with fury. "He and his woman wouldn't help you take land that wasn't yours." "I did what had to be done," Blackthorn sneered. "To bring order, commerce, a future to this lawless place. Thousands will benefit." Caleb Thornton stepped forward, weapon raised. "You're digging a deeper hole with every word, Judge." But Blackthorn was past caring. The fall of his empire had snapped something loose. Years of unchecked control had made him believe he was invincible. "Do you even understand what you've interrupted?" he barked, laughing bitterly. "There's a fortune tied up in this land. Men in Washington who've poured gold into this railroad project. Senators, cabinet officials. You think I did all this alone?" Abigail felt her stomach drop. "The corruption. It runs to the Capitol," she breathed. "Of course it does," he snapped. "The law's a tool for power, not the other way around. And when my backers hear what you've done, Marshal, you'll be out before sundown." The sharp crack of a rifle shot shattered the moment. But it wasn't from the federal line. Roy Maddox, one of Hollister's few loyal deputies still standing, had fired a warning shot skyward. "Enough jawing," he growled. "We came to finish a job, and I aim to see it done." He swung his rifle toward Abigail. But Nate Redhawk was faster. A single shot rang from the bluff. Maddox spun as the bullet struck his shoulder, sending his rifle clattering to stone. Gunfire erupted like a storm. Abigail dove for cover behind a boulder as lead screamed through the air, chipping stone and filling the canyon with smoke. Flashes lit the heights where Nate returned fire, striking with precision. Caleb's men, positioned smartly above, fought to suppress Blackthorn's lawmen while avoiding their own pinned below. Dr. Eleanor Hayes crouched beside Abigail, clutching her bag tight. "You hit?" "Not yet," Abigail replied, flipping open the cylinder of her pistol. "But this sure ain't how we drew it up." "No plan survives desperate men with guns," the doctor muttered, checking her own cover. The firefight stretched long and deafening. But federal superiority began to weigh in. One by one, the Bitter Creek lawmen dropped their weapons or dropped wounded, until only Hollister and Blackthorn clung to the ruins near the fire. Caleb's voice rang out, commanding, "Hollister, it's done. Surrender now and we can talk terms." "What kind of terms?" Hollister shouted back, fear fraying his voice. "You'll hang me anyway." "Maybe not," Caleb said. "Cooperation helps." Abigail saw the sheriff hesitate. His gaze flicked to Blackthorn, then toward the firelight glinting off the rifles above. Then Blackthorn's voice slid out like venom. "Thomas," he said, using the sheriff's first name for the first time anyone could remember. "Your family. Think of them." The words hit like a death toll. Hollister groaned and rose, hands raised in surrender. "I'm done," he rasped. "But Judge, this has gone too far. Folks are dead for your damn schemes." Blackthorn stared after him, eyes full of fury. "Coward," he spat. "You'll regret betraying me." "No," Wade Hollister answered softly. "What I regret is not stopping you a long time ago." With the sheriff disarmed and defeated, only Silas Blackthorn remained, alone, encircled, and stripped of any allies. The ruins he once used as a fortress now boxed him in, federal rifles trained on every stone. "Judge Blackthorn," Caleb Thornton called out from below. "You're surrounded. Show your hands. This ends now." For a long beat, the canyon held its breath. Then came Blackthorn's voice, low, bitter, and hollowed by defeat. "Yes, Marshal. I suppose it does." He stepped into view with the reluctant grace of a man who'd spent a lifetime in command. His hands lifted slowly. His coat was torn, his face bruised, but his posture remained proud, clinging to the last shreds of dignity, even as it slipped from his grasp. Abigail Crow let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. The guns had gone quiet. But as the federal troops began securing prisoners, she knew in her bones this fight was far from over. The real war against corruption that stretched far beyond Bitter Creek was only just beginning. Nate Red Hawk descended from the ridge, rifle in hand, concern etched into his face. "You hurt?" "No," she said, heart still racing, shaken but standing. Her gaze drifted to Blackthorn, now cuffed and guarded. "Do you think it's truly over?" "The gunfires stopped," Nate said, scanning the smoldering ruins. "But he wasn't lying about one thing. This mess runs deep, past Nevada, all the way to Washington." Dr. Eleanor Hayes approached, brushing dust from her skirt, medical bag slung at her side. "Mrs. Crow," she said gently, "your testimony is going to be pivotal. Are you ready for that?" Abigail looked across the canyon, where justice had finally found its mark, if only just. "I'm ready for whatever comes next," she answered. "No one should ever suffer through what we did." As the prisoners were led away, and silence settled over the battlefield, Abigail realized that her survival in the desert had led to something far more enduring. The rebirth of justice in a land long starved of it. 3 months later, Carson City Federal Courthouse. The trial of Silas Blackthorne would go down in frontier history as a turning point. For 3 relentless months, the courthouse brimmed with witnesses. Tribal elders, government officials, railway surveyors, grieving widows. The rot that had seeped through Nevada's institutions was exposed, one ledger line at a time. At the heart of it all sat Abigail Crow, whose meticulous records from the Silver Dollar Saloon became the keystone of the prosecution. Day after day, she took the stand, detailing how vast sums had been funneled through the saloon, laundered under fake accounts, manipulated through land grabs timed with insider knowledge of rail expansions. The scheme was wide-reaching, deliberate, and predatory. "Mrs. Crow," the federal prosecutor asked on her 3rd day of testimony, "in your expert opinion as a bookkeeper, could these transactions have been accidental?" She held Blackthorne's gaze across the courtroom. He sat stiff-backed, still clinging to the illusion of control. "No, sir," she said firmly. "This wasn't sloppiness. It was intentional, carefully structured. Someone with deep knowledge of both territorial law and federal procedure put this into motion." "And based on your experience in Bitter Creek," the prosecutor pressed, "who had that knowledge and authority?" "Judge Blackthorne," Abigail replied. "He was the only one with the legal reach and political connections to orchestrate it all." The defense rose, a silver-haired lawyer from San Francisco, polished and well-paid. "Mrs. Crow," he began, "isn't it true that you were convicted of theft in Judge Blackthorne's court?" "Yes," she answered without flinching. "But, and isn't your testimony here today driven by vengeance for that conviction?" Abigail didn't blink. "If what happened to me had been a lawful sentence, I wouldn't be standing here. He ordered me into the desert, barefoot, no water, no food. That wasn't justice. That was attempted murder." Dardasher Eleanor Hayes took the stand next, her medical testimony like a hammer blow. She'd exhumed 6 graves. None had died naturally. "Evan Cole," she testified, "died from a massive cranial fracture. The blow came from behind, likely while he was kneeling. Isla," she added, her voice tightening, "suffered similar trauma. She also bore ligature burns on her wrists and ankles. She'd been tied up before her death." Even the federal marshals in the courtroom paled at the cold detail of the killings. But perhaps the most unexpected witness was Patrick Doyle, the owner of the Silver Dollar. Initially arrested as a conspirator, Doyle's role shifted when it was revealed he'd been blackmailed into compliance. The threats weren't vague, they were personal. "They knew where my parents lived," he said, voice thick with his Irish accent. "Judge Blackthorne showed me letters, said there'd be accidents, and when a man like that says something without saying it, you listen." The prosecutor leaned forward. "Did he ever make a direct threat?" "No, not exactly," Doyle said, eyes clouded. "But when a man holds death in his pocket, he doesn't need to. The fallout." The trials unearthed a vast, interconnected web. As Blackthorne had warned, names in Washington began to surface. Senators, representatives, and federal contractors found themselves under the microscope. The fight for full justice would take years, but one moment brought healing. On the final day of testimony, Iron Fox appeared before the court. Standing beside him was Little Fox, alive, free, and no longer a pawn in the judge's twisted game. "I was forced to cooperate," Iron Fox said, voice calm but heavy. "But I stand here today to say the truth no longer belongs to the powerful. It belongs to the people." The judge said my boy would hang for cattle theft. Iron Fox told the court. But when the federal marshals looked into it, there wasn't a lick of truth to the charges. My son never stole a thing. They just used him to keep me quiet. When the final verdicts came down, they struck like a thunderclap across the territory. Silas Blackthorne was convicted on 12 federal charges: conspiracy, fraudulent land deals, treaty violations, and orchestrating murder. His name, once spoken in fear, now echoed through courtrooms in disgrace. Wade Hollister, the former sheriff, received a reduced sentence after testifying against the judge. But several of his deputies, Eli Cole, Roy Maddox, and others, faced their own days in front of the jury. Some wept, some raged. All were found guilty. The consequences rippled wide. The government seized every acre tied to the phony land deals. Much of that land, long stolen from tribal hands, was returned. The railroad companies, desperate to salvage their reputation, agreed to honor original treaty terms and compensate the tribes affected. But for Abigail Crow, the most unexpected turn came 3 weeks later in the form of an envelope stamped Territorial Administrator, Prescott. Inside was a formal letter, says Sir Crow, for your extraordinary service in exposing systemic corruption. We are offering you the position of Territorial Inspector for Anti-Corruption Enforcement. You will have federal backing, cross-jurisdictional authority, and a salary commensurate with the weight of this duty. She read it twice. From a woman abandoned in the desert with nothing but a rigged conviction and torn boots. She was now being asked to police corruption across the entire territory. She found Nate Redhawk near the Carson City Courthouse, tending to dust fire, brushing down the loyal Mustang after another long day in court. The trials are over, she said, handing him the letter. And this just came. Nate unfolded the paper, eyebrows lifting as he read. Then came the first true smile she'd seen on his face in weeks. Territorial Inspector, huh? He said, eyes bright. That's a hell of a step up from bookkeeper. They're offering you something too, she added. Coordinator for Tribal Affairs, liaison between your people and the territorial government. He looked surprised. They told you? Marshal Thornton said we made a good team. He wants to keep it that way. They stood in silence a while, watching wagons clatter by and children chase dogs down the main street. The scent of roasted meat drifted from an inn nearby. For once, no gunfire, no threats, no secrets. So, Nate said quietly, you ready to chase down corruption for a living? Abigail looked at the letter again. Her thoughts drifted back to the broken people she'd met. Evan Cole, Ayla, Little Fox, even herself, and all those who still suffered in silence. I am, she said, but only if you'll be my partner, not just in the job. Nate turned to her, solemn. Partner, he repeated, letting the word settle on his tongue like a promise. I like the sound of that. That night, they celebrated. Not in dusty trail clothes beside a campfire, but dressed sharp and clean in Carson City's finest restaurant. Soft lights, warm food, and the music of laughter rather than gunshots. As they walked toward the doors, Abigail glanced at Nate. There's something I need to ask you, he said, halting under the glow of a hanging lantern. What is it? When I pulled you from that canyon, I thought I was just saving a stranger's life. I never expected you'd change the way I see the world, how I see the future. She felt her heart catch. Nate, I know we come from different worlds, he said, And I know there'll be fights ahead. But I want to face them all. With you. He reached into his coat pocket. I don't have a ring yet, and I'm not much for speeches. But, Abigail Crow, will you marry me? She didn't hesitate. Yes, she whispered, tears shining in her eyes. Yes, I will. 6 months later, Prescott, now known as Abigail Redhawk, she stood on the wooden walk of Prescott's main street, the high desert air sweet with sage and promise. Behind her was a path lined with loss, survival, and triumph. Ahead, a future filled with purpose. Dust stirred as Nate stepped out of the territorial office, papers in one hand, his other reaching for hers like it always had. Without words, without fail. The wind caught the edges of her coat. She looked down the sunlit street and smiled. They would face resistance to their union. There would be crooked men in clean suits, hidden ledgers, and towns that refused to change. But side by side, they would fight for something better. The desert had tried to break her. Instead, it forged her into something stronger. They walked on together, two souls who had survived hell, found love, and chosen justice. The frontier was still wild, still dangerous, but it was theirs now, and they were ready. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. We appreciate you more than you think. If this tale stirred something deep inside, we invite you to remain part of this frontier of memories. More true stories of honor, compassion, and destiny are waiting for you here. Subscribe, share, comment, and thank you for writing with us today. Aviso Legal. Disclaimer. Our content is designed for artistic and entertainment purposes and may reinterpret historical themes using fictional touches. We apply AI tools thoughtfully, only to support production, while keeping human supervision over editing, emotional tone, and narrative coherence. We always comply with regulatory guidelines for AI-based media and avoid deepfake practices or identity manipulation. All supporting components remain legally sourced. Please ask for authorization before sharing or adapting any segment. Your respect makes it possible for us to continue telling meaningful stories.